NO means no, and nitrogen and oxygen. Welcome to The Big Puzzle. In this podcast, we explore the subtle connections between science, religion, politics, economics, and history. One piece at a time, we unveil the big picture of this shared experience that we call life. When people think about air, they usually think about oxygen. But truth is that oxygen is only 1/5 of the volume in the atmosphere. The other 4/5 are mostly nitrogen. So why do we focus so much in oxygen? Well, because oxygen is so critical for us that we can't survive even a couple of minutes without it. So for us, the most important element is oxygen. Or is it? Nitrogen still has a very important role. Two ways. The first one, it is in breathing. So nitrogen dilutes the concentration of oxygen, and that makes it suitable for us. If we will be breathing pure oxygen, that will eventually start hurting our body. We're not prepared to breathe pure oxygen, so we need some other gas that would dilute it. In nature we have nitrogen, but there's also some other inert gases like argon that could do the job as well. So why is that? Why, even though what we really use in the chemical combustion, like we were talking in the last piece of the puzzle, why is it that we need something to dilute it? Why can't we just use it concentrated? Well, if you believe in creation, you would believe that the earth was created for us. So since we need a certain proportion of oxygen and an inert gas, well, the earth was created with that proportion in the atmosphere. If you create in evolution, well, it's the other way around. So the earth created us. We're tailor-made for this earth because those are the conditions that we have, and we had to evolve into those. In either case, the result is the same. The earth and us are really, really interconnected, and we depend on very precise parameters to be able to survive. But nitrogen is not only important as a diluent of oxygen. It's also a very important component in our bodies. Actually, all life has about 3% of nitrogen in their composition. The first element obviously is oxygen, then the second is carbon, the third one is hydrogen, and well, the fourth one is nitrogen. Then you have calcium, phosphorus, and some other ones. So for humans, our bodies are about 3% nitrogen. So if you weigh 200 pounds, well, 6 pounds of you are actually nitrogen. Nitrogen is particularly important in DNA. If you look at the DNA molecule, you will find that nitrogen is all over the place. So really there's no life possible without nitrogen, because as far as we know, there's no life possible without DNA. Now if we go to Mars, well, there's a problem. There's no nitrogen that we know of in the quantities that we would need to survive. So there's a little nitrogen in the atmosphere, but again, the atmosphere is so thin, and also I think it's about just 3% of that very thin atmosphere that is nitrogen, and it's very difficult, it's very energy intensive to extract that nitrogen from the atmosphere and to store it. It's not something that can be done at scale, and especially in the volumes that life would need to survive. There are some hints that there might be some nitrates in the soil, but well, again, it's not very easy to extract, and since it's very difficult to detect, well, we must assume that it's not very prevalent. So the amount of nitrogen that we would need to survive in Mars, well, it's not there. Not for us, not for the algae, not for the trees, not for the animals, not for anybody. So that is a big problem. That is a big problem that people has been trying to solve. Some people say, well, we should mine it in asteroids, in comets, in whatever, in other planets, or in the moons of other planets, and then bring it to Mars. Well, that is ridiculous. It's impossible to do. So that is basically the second big problem. Not the worst, I would say, but it's still a very big problem that is very difficult to overcome if we ever want to have 1 million people living in Mars. There is this concept called terraforming. Terraforming is applying some technology that would eventually turn a planet into an livable habitat. So terra, it's the Latin name for Earth, is forming into the Earth. It's turning another planet into the Earth. And in some cases they would say, well, we could genetically engineer some bacteria, and then we can put that bacteria in the planet and just let it grow, and that bacteria would, let's say, like we were talking last time, extracting oxygen from the atmosphere. Well, we explained that that's very unlikely because of the amount of energy that would be required, and bacteria, well, they don't have that many sources of energy. But still, it's this idea that you could do something that would scale itself, and then it would eventually slowly turn the planet into something that looks like the Earth. So there are plans for doing that in Mars, but yeah, we don't have the technology. We're far, and sometimes it's pretty much impossible. So one thing that is impossible, again, it has to do with nitrogen. So terraforming cannot create elements out of the blue, right? You can transform elements by biological, chemical processes, but you cannot just make them out of thin air. Right? This is the case of nitrogen. If nitrogen is not there, it's not present in the planet, well, nothing that you can do can make nitrogen appear. So that is a big problem. But wait, isn't it possible to transfer one element into another? Yes, we can transform elements. That's something that requires us to learn a little about etymology and history. So let's start with the word chemistry. Chemistry comes from the word alchemia. And alchemia, actually, you can guess by the al at the beginning, comes from the Arabic. And it's alchemy. And chemi actually is not an Arabic word. It apparently it was borrowed from Greek, but it's not even really a Greek word. Apparently it was also borrowed from Egyptian, and we really don't know what it means, but seems to be that it's related to the soil in the Nile, right? And you know the Nile that has these big cycles of flooding that bring nutrients. So it has this idea of transformation, right? If the etymology is correct, we really don't know. But let's assume that it is. So the Egyptians had this idea of, well, something happens and then desert is turned into, fertile land. So then that, migrated into alchemy and finally into chemistry. So it's kind of an interesting cycle. But within that cycle, there were some darker stages. So during some periods of time, alchemy had this idea of transforming one element into another, almost magically. So most desire was to be able to transform lead into gold. And many alchemists roamed around Europe selling this idea to kings. So all the kings were very interested in becoming rich, and what better than turning something into gold. And since lead has some of the properties similar to gold, well, that was kind of the natural place to go. So alchemists were always trying to find the philosopher's stone, that would allow them to transform lead into gold. Now, some of the alchemists were successful in a way. So what they would say is, well, king, I found the method to transform lead into gold, but it's kind of expensive. I need to do a lot of stuff that require money. So if you give me 2 pounds of gold, I will show you that I can transform lead into gold. And a few weeks later, they will come back showing 1 pound of gold. And they would say, well, I was able to transform 1 pound of lead into 1 pound of gold. Now, if you give me 2 other pounds of gold, I will, keep doing this. So I don't know for how long they could get away with that. But, people are people, scammers are scammers. And even today, we see some people that I'm not going to mention claiming that they could make space travel so much cheaper, but you need to give them trillions of dollars to do that. So you see that things change, but they don't change. History repeats itself. Now, that's kind of the dark side of alchemy. But there were some people that were taking seriously this analysis of what is the composition of matter, how does it behave, and eventually that evolved into a science, and that's the science that we now know as chemistry. Interestingly enough, chemistry abandoned this idea of transmutation, of transforming one element into another, and went through a more rational, scientific approach. But, at some point they realized that matter were composed by atoms. And then atoms mean actually that you can't break, right? So the minimum element. And then they realized, well, we could actually break atoms. There's things inside there. They first identify electrons, and they identified protons, and then they realized that there were some other things that were called neutrons, and then they realized that those things were also composed of other things, and so on and so on, where today. But then they started understanding that different elements were just different combinations of those basic building blocks. So carbon will have a number of electrons and a number of protons and neutrons, right? While oxygen will have a different number, and helium and gold and lead, and all these elements were just the same, basically 3 type of subatomic particles in different numbers. Now, they also discovered that some of those elements would transform into other elements, especially these very big elements, and that had to do with radioactive processes, that eventually one atom of one element would turn into a different element, just naturally. And they started thinking, okay, if that's possible, then alchemy was not that wrong. You can actually transform one element into another. The problem is, however, that the energy that you need to do that is ridiculous. We've identified 4 fundamental forces in the universe. And these are the strong interaction, the weak interaction, electromagnetic, and gravity. Now, the strongest of one is the strong interaction. It's actually what keeps the atoms and the nucleus in particular together. So if you have positive protons that are stuck together, well, you know that positive charge or equal charge, they repel each other. So there has to be some force that keep them together that are stronger than the electromagnetic forces that would try to, tear them apart. So that's the strong interaction. It has some weird characteristics. I'm not an expert, but it's very interesting. So when you're trying to transform one element into another, basically you're dealing with those forces. So let's put an example. Let's go back to Mars, and let's say that we want to transform, let's say, carbon into nitrogen. Why carbon? Because carbon is closer to nitrogen. So you have carbon and oxygen are the two elements that are more similar to nitrogen. You can look at that into the periodic table. But yeah, it would be easier to turn a carbon atom into a nitrogen atom. Well, easy. Yeah, easy if you have tons of energy. I haven't done the calculation myself, but I found it somewhere, and I did some conversions of units to make sure that I was getting it right. But let's say that you want to transform 1 kilogram of carbon-12, the most common type of carbon in nature, into nitrogen. So you would need to add protons into the nucleus of a carbon, right? In a simplistic way to do that. And again, you have to deal with those forces, those very extreme forces. Well, for transforming 1 kilogram, and for you who don't use the metric system, that will be 2.2 pounds, you would need to use 4 million megawatt hours of energy. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's roughly the yearly generation of Hoover Dam, right? So if you use all the energy produced by Hoover Dam in 1 year, you can transform 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds of carbon into a kilogram of nitrogen. Well, in the Earth, nitrogen is worth approximately $1 per kilogram. So you can see that, yeah, it's not really feasible. You cannot produce, you will need let's say 3 years of the energy generated by Hoover Dam just to create enough nitrogen to replace the one that you have in your body. So not doable. Even though we have the technology, we can do it at individual atom level and not at bulk or macroscopic level. So yeah, that's not something that we could do in Mars. We cannot do it pretty much anywhere. In conclusion, nitrogen and oxygen are the big no for Mars. There's not enough of them available for sustaining a city of 1 million people. We're stuck here. we have this planet. Again, we're tailor-made for the planet, or the planet was tailor-made for us. In other case, we need to keep it. We need to make it better. We need to take care of it. So my homework for this piece of the puzzle is the same as the last one. Let's take good care of this planet. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have thought experiments and we shouldn't try to develop technology and figure out ways of how could we, expand humanity to, other realms. But it's not happening anytime soon, and definitely it's not happening in Mars. So yeah, be nice to this planet and be nice to each other. We really need each other in this, like I say in the beginning, this shared experience that we call life. So if you enjoyed this video, well, you can always like it. You can always share it with somebody that you think you will find this concept interesting. Thank you again for helping place this new piece of the big puzzle, and well, hope to see you in the next one.